We often romanticize the Age of Discovery as a golden era of navigation, a time when brave men charted the unknown and expanded the borders of humanity. But we forget that the maps of the 15th century were not drawn with hope, they were drawn with fear. They were bordered by warnings. Hic Sunt Dracones, here be dragons. There is a primal arrogance in the human belief that if we sail far enough, we will find gold, or spices, or glory. We never pause to consider that some corners of this earth were hidden from us, not by distance, but by divine quarantine. We assume that if we knock on the door of the unknown, we will be welcomed as guests. But what if the thing waiting behind that door was never meant to be seen by mortal eyes? What if the heavily guarded gates of paradise were closed for a reason? October 11, 1492, the Atlantic Ocean. The Santa María cuts through the black water, a wooden splinter drifting in an indifferent void. On board, the atmosphere is not one of excitement, but of a slow, festering rot. The Admiral Cristobal Colon stands on the quarterdeck, his eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. He is a man walking the razor's edge of history. His crew is starving, their gums bleeding from scurvy, their minds poisoned by the isolation of the open sea. Mutiny is no longer a whisper in the dark, it is a promise. They have been sailing for 5 weeks into the abyss, and the ocean has offered them nothing but silence. But on this night, the silence changes. It does not break, it deepens. Around 10 p.m., the wind dies, not a gradual slowing, but an instant, unnatural cessation of all movement. The sails go limp, hanging like shrouds. The heavy Atlantic swell flattens into a mirror of obsidian glass, reflecting the stars with a clarity that hurts the eyes. And then came the smell. It was not the salt spray or the stench of the unwashed crew. It was a perfume of overwhelming, suffocating sweetness, scents of jasmine, myrrh, and ozone drifting across the water, so potent it made the sailors gag. It was the smell of life, but life so concentrated, so perfect, it felt cancerous. Colin stared into the darkness, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wrote in his logbook that he saw a light in the distance. He described it as a little wax candle rising and falling. History tells us this was a torch held by a native on the beach. History is wrong. The light did not flicker like fire. It pulsed with a rhythmic, geometric precision. It was a cold, white star hovering just above the horizon, watching them. The Pinta and the Nina drifted closer, drawn in by a current that defied the lack of wind. The water beneath them began to glow with bioluminescence, revealing shapes deep in the abysmus of shifting shadows that seemed to shy away from the holy light ahead. The crew fell to their knees, clutching their rosaries, weeping not with joy, but with an instinctive, primal dread. They had prayed for land. They had prayed for salvation. But as the silhouette of the coastline emerged from the dark, blocking out the stars, they realized their prayers had been answered with a literalism that would doom them all. They had not found the Indies, they had found the garden. And the garden was not empty. Dawn broke over the Bahamian shoal, but it was not the dawn of a sun. The light came from the island itself, a radiant, blinding iridescence that turned the seawater into liquid gold. The heavy wooden longboats of the Santa María ground against the sand with a wet crunch. Columbus was the first to step ashore, the royal standard of Castile gripped tight in his trembling hand. He fell to his knees, weeping, reciting the Te Deum, preparing to claim this land for Isabella and Ferdinand. Behind him, the crew stood in a stupor, their eyes unable to focus on the foliage ahead. The trees were not wood and leaf, they were pillars of crystalline fractal geometry, singing in a low, thrumming vibration that rattled the sailors' teeth. They did not see natives. There were no Arawak or Lucayan people to greet them with fresh water and curious smiles. There was only the Guardian. It did not descend from the clouds. It unfolded from the air itself. The text of Ezekiel describes the Opanum, the wheels within wheels, rimmed with a multitude of eyes. But the human mind cannot process such architecture without breaking. The sailors screamed as the entity manifested before them. It was a colossal interlocking mechanism of burning gold rings, spinning in impossible directions, grinding with the sound of tectonic plates shifting. Hundreds of eyes, the size of shields, blinked in unison, radiating a heat that blistered the skin instantly. Panic is a universal language. The discipline of the Spanish Navy, forged in the Reconquista, shattered in seconds. A bosun, driven mad by the sheer geometry of the creature, leveled his heavy arquebus and fired. The matchlock mechanism snapped, the powder ignited, and the lead ball struck the spinning rings. It didn't ricochet, it simply ceased to exist. The entity did not attack. It judged. A sound erupted from the burning wheels, not a voice, but a frequency. It was the commandment, the absolute word of authority, spoken with such intensity that it liquefied the inner ears of the front line. Men collapsed, blood jetting from their noses and tear ducts, clutching their heads as their brains boiled within their skulls. The swords of Toledo steel, the finest metallurgy in Europe, grew red-hot in their scabbards, searing the flesh of the men who wore them. Columbus tried to stand, to hold up the cross, screaming that he was a servant of the Lord. The entity shifted its gaze toward him. The admiral didn't burn. He unraveled his armor, his clothes, and then his skin peeled away in layers, not ripped by claws, but disassembled by the sheer proximity to holiness. This was not the loving embrace of the Savior. This was the raw, unshielded radiation of the divine. The beach became a slaughterhouse of sensory overload. Men clawed at their own eyes to stop seeing the terrible glory of the thing. They scrambled back to the boats, oars thrashing in the bloody surf, but the water around the ships began to boil. The trap had not just sprung on the beach. The gates of the deep were opening beneath the hulls. The Santa María was gone, reduced to driftwood and steam. But the Nina, lighter and faster, caught the wind. Martin Alonso Pinzon, the captain, cut the anchor line with a manic desperation. Screaming at his men to pull the yards, they fled into the open Atlantic, pursued not by enemy ships, but by a rising atmospheric pressure that flattened the waves behind them. They did not sail back to Spain. They were herded. The entity at the garden had marked them. They were the carriers of a divine pathogen, a scent of sin that would lead the executioners back to the source. The voyage home was impossibly fast. The Atlantic, usually a graveyard of storms in winter, remained eerily calm, the winds propelling the Nina at a speed that buckled its hull. On March 15, 1493, the ship drifted into the port of Palos de la Frontera. The townspeople rushed to the docks, cheering, expecting gold, parrots, and indios. They found a ghost ship. The crew of the Nina sat on the deck, fused to the wood, their skin translucent, their eyes burnt out of their sockets, chanting hymns in a tongue that sounded like grinding stones. Pinzon was the only one standing, his body covered in geometric burns, pointing a trembling finger at the sky. "It follows," he whispered. "The kingdom follows." The sky over Andalusia didn't just darken, it ignited. The clouds parted to reveal the second hierarchy, the seraphim. These were not the humanoid beauties of Renaissance art. They were serpentine dragons of copper and fire, possessing 6 wings, 2 to cover the face, 2 to cover the feet, and 2 to fly. They descended upon Palos with the indifference of a boot stepping on an anthill. The massacre was total. The bell tower of the Church of St. George melted like wax as a seraph perched upon it, its heat radiance turning the stone to magma. The Spanish garrison, veterans of the Granada War, attempted to form a defensive square. They leveled their crossbows and primitive arquebuses, firing into the blinding light. The bolts and bullets vaporized before impact. The soldiers were not struck down by weapons, they were unmade. The seraphim sang a chorus that ruptured the internal organs of every living thing within a mile radius. News traveled fast, but the host traveled faster. By April, the entities had reached Seville, the greatest city in Castile, the heart of the Inquisition, prepared for war. The Grand Inquisitor Torquemada took to the walls, brandishing holy relics, convinced these were demons sent by Satan to test their faith. He ordered the cannons, the heavy bombards, to fire upon the floating wheels of fire hovering over the Guadalquivir River. The cannonballs struck the entities, and passed through harmlessly, emerging as molten slag on the other side. The church's exorcisms were answered with silence, and then annihilation. The Cathedral of Seville, the largest Gothic cathedral in the world, became the epicenter of the judgment. The entities did not destroy it, they occupied it. They nested in the spires, their radiation turning the holy water to blood and the stone saints to dust. The defense of Spain collapsed not because of a lack of courage, but because the enemy was an ontological error in the reality of warfare. You cannot lay siege to a concept. You cannot kill a miracle with a sword. By May 1493, the Iberian Peninsula was no longer a kingdom of men. It was the beachhead of the apocalypse. The pestilence of glory crossed the Pyrenees in the summer of 1493. It did not move like an army. It moved like a sunrise that never stopped brightening. The kingdom of France dissolved not into anarchy but into a catatonic stupor. The angels did not need supply lines. They did not rest. They simply drifted east, a floating constellation of geometric horrors that turned the forests of Europe into pillars of salt and glass. By Christmas Eve, the refugees of Christendom had crowded into the one place they believed could withstand the judgment. Rome, the eternal city, was a cesspit of hysteria. Pope Alexander VI, the infamous Rodrigo Borgia, sat upon the chair of St. Peter, a man of immense corruption facing the literal manifestation of the God he claimed to represent. He ordered the Swiss Guard to man the walls of the Castel Sant'Angelo, the fortress mausoleum of Hadrian. They stood shoulder to shoulder, gripping their halberds, sweat slicking their armor in the freezing December air. They were the finest mercenaries in Europe, disciplined and fearless. But as the sun set, they looked up and saw that the stars had descended. The siege lasted 12 minutes. A dominion, a member of the second sphere of angels, manifesting as a humanoid figure of pure, blinding Mercury holding a golden orb, descended upon the Vatican. The Swiss Guard fired their cannons. The iron bowls struck the entity and transformed into flocks of white doves, fluttering uselessly against the entity's metallic skin. It was a mockery of peace. The entity raised its hand, and the Castel Sant'Angelo was not breached, it was inverted. The stone walls turned soft as flesh, absorbing the screaming soldiers into the masonry. The fortress became a living, breathing tomb, the faces of the Swiss Guard pressing out from the stone, frozen in eternal screams of suffocation. Inside St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope knelt before the altar, clutching the bull of donation, the legal document granting him authority over the earth. He attempted to bargain. He offered the new world, he offered the souls of the East. The roof of the basilica tore open, peeling back like wet paper. The light of the Dominion flooded the nave. It did not speak Latin. It did not speak at all. It emitted a frequency that calcified the blood in the Pope's veins. Alexander VI died, not as a martyr, but as a statue, solidified in a pose of begging, a monument to the irrelevance of human power. With the fall of Rome, the psychological spine of humanity snapped. Kings tore off their crowns and walked into the sea. Generals fell upon their own swords. The concept of resistance evaporated because the enemy was not evil. The enemy was absolute. You cannot rebel against gravity. You cannot fight the heat of the sun. The great harvesting had begun. The entities moved from city to city, gathering the populations into vast, glowing columns of light. Those taken were not seen again. Those left behind wandered the silent, empty streets of a world that no longer belonged to them, waiting for the wheels of fire to return and finish the work. The age of man had ended. The seventh day had begun. 5 centuries have passed since the Santa Maria made landfall. The history books were never written, for there was no one left to hold the pen. The silence that fell over the earth is not the silence of the void. It is the silence of a library, heavy, watchful, and terrified of making a sound. The Industrial Revolution never happened. The combustion engine, the splitting of the atom, the internet, these are dreams that died in the womb of a species that was cold before it could mature. If you were to look at the earth from space today, in the year 2025, you would not see the blue marble of water and clouds. You would see a glittering, golden geode. The contagion of the garden has spread from the Caribbean to cover the entire globe. The oceans are no longer salt water. They are thick, translucent nectar that glows in the dark. The continents are choked with crystalline forests that chime in the wind. The great cities of London, New York, and Tokyo are not ruins of concrete. They are overgrown reliquaries, their skyscrapers strangled by vines of copper and light. Humanity is not extinct, but we are no longer the masters of this domain. We are the vermin. Small, feral tribes of men and women cling to existence in the deepest caves of the Andes, the frozen dark of Siberia, and the sunless trenches of the oceanic abyss. We have evolved to be photophobic. We fear the sun, for the sun is the eye of the Father. We fear the beauty of the world, for beauty is the camouflage of the predator. We scurry in the shadows, passing down oral traditions of a time when the world was gray, and dull, and safe. A time when God ignored us. The entities, the Epanim, the Seraphim, the Cherubim still patrol the skies. They are the new weather patterns. A storm is not rain. It is a passing flight of angels, incinerating everything in their path with the radiation of absolute love. The irony is total. Columbus set out to find the Garden of Eden, to return man to the state of grace before the fall. He succeeded. The earth has been restored to paradise. It is perfect. It is sinless. It is eternal. And there is no room in paradise for us. We spent thousands of years praying for heaven to come down to earth. We never asked ourselves what would happen if it actually arrived. We forgot that in a garden, the gardener pulls the weeds. And we, with our wars, and our greed, and our noise, we were the weeds. This file is closed. The warning remains. If you hear the singing, do not listen. If you see the light, do not look. Stay in the dark. The dark is the only place left where you are free. Click the button below to enter the archives. Subscribing ensures you remain aware of the threats that lie in the blind spots of history. Until next time, System Offline.